Okay, now let me. So everyone saw Aviv's bio in the poster. Anyway, she was one of my excellences in my courses, and she wrote a wonderful thesis about how to look at the world in a systemic way. She's the youngest of our team, so very important to learn from her.
Well,
Aviv, I leave you the floor. Thank you for accepting this invitation.
Cool. Thank you so much for the opportunity and having me. I'm excited to share with you this presentation, but also I'm mostly excited to hear from you all and also learn from you all. As Brunella said, I am very young, but I'm just very enthusiastic to learn. And yes, so my presentation, if you haven't seen the abstract, is titled Populism in Civil Society, a Systemic Perspective. And I'm specifically going to be speaking about Trumpism, or let's say Trump's populism, and how this is affecting US democracy, and in the sense how we arrive to this moment, and also what will come from this moment. And these are some important questions I think that we should be answering and also questioning. So I'm starting off the presentation. I don't know if, oh, I can do it from here, sorry, okay. So I'm starting off the presentation with a quote from Genesis. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So I thought it was important to start with this quote because I think that rhetorically it captures a lot of the themes that we have seen throughout the 21st century, but also the pillars of the ontological view of the world of modern science, as well as our anthropocentric evolution through this linear causal relationship with our environments that has also led to the establishment of, I would say, a neoliberal economic model, which is capitalism, and also the way that we have failed to recognize that we are interrelated with our environment and not outside of it. And this has caused, environmental destruction, but I also think that it is the epistemological model that we also face within our social systems and how we interact with one another, and how we also, I think, deal with issues and conflicts that we have within our social systems. And so, oh, let me see. Okay. Do you see the next slide? Just to make sure. Okay. So I'm going to begin by talking about Katherine Hayles, Luhmann, and also Baudrillard. And so I begin by speaking about second order cybernetics and self-organization. And so basically drawing on second order cybernetics, Katherine Hayles, in her book, How We Became Posthuman, she emphasizes that systems, biological, cognitive, or social, are autopoietic. And I'm sure all of you know what this means in her theory, but basically that they're self-organizing and self-producing. So rather than functioning as an input-output mechanism, which is very much part of that linear causality model, these systems maintain their identity by selectively responding to the environmental perturbations that can be expressed through their internal organization. So she refers to this as operational closure, and this is combined with structural coupling. So basically systems are closed in their operation, so in their self-organization, but are open to structural interactions with other systems. And she stresses that the center of analysis shifts in second order cybernetics from the observed system to observing the observed in the system. So the observer becomes part of the system. And this reinforces this conceptual idea that we are part of the environment. We are part in this relational, we can even call it dance and adjusting that we do within the environment, and how we can be able to sustain crisis. And the observer is not outside, but it's part of the operation. And so meaning and perception are also generated within the systems based on their own structures. So what appears to be information or communication from the outside, so the feedback that we receive from the outside, is in fact interpreted through the self-organization of that self-observed system. and it's not directly absorbed in the sense that, yes, we are having a relationship with the external, but what we make of it and how we understand the world is also affected by how we are organized within our systems. And this is important because later on when I speak about Luhmann, when he talks about social systems, he also continues on with the fact that society is composed of autopoietic subsystems. And why is this important? Because if we level down to only a linear cause and effect model, then we also don't take into consideration all the subsystems that make up our social systems. And he refers to these as, let's say, law, media, politics, education, technology, and I even bring in civil society, because I think that in today's world, I think that people, individuals, and also civil systems are very important into fighting crisis and also social tensions. And these systems are not simply collections of individuals, but they're structured according to specific internal codes. So he brings up legal and illegal in law, true or false in science, and etc. And they maintain this operational closure that Hayles speaks of, while remaining cognitively open to the environment and its feedback. And so he stresses that systems define themselves by the difference between the system and the environment. And so there's this boundary, but the boundary does not isolate them from the environment, but it allows there to be a regulated interaction, ensuring that the system's stability and capacity has this mechanism to be able to adapt. And social systems cannot function without this distinction from their internal structures, depend on differentiating themselves from both their surroundings and from other systems. And now mass media is specifically important in this because in Luhmann's view, everything, and I also think that this is true in this century, but most of what we know about the world and what is happening and about ourselves is now presented to us through mass media, because of digitalization and also just the various networks that we now find ourselves communicating in throughout the world. And this produces a circulates communication, not simply by relying on facts, but by also selecting information that maintains its own operation. So Luhmann claims that mass media is a system that can be observed, but it also observes and then that re-enters its own system for what it then tells the world and its audiences. And so it reproduces itself by filtering, formatting, and narrativing content in ways that attract and retain public attention. And so as a result of this, the reality presented by media is not objective, but a double reality. And so it's one that's self-referential to the system itself, but simultaneously other referential, which is what Luhmann refers to as is portrayed in the events that it presents. And so why is this important? Because when we speak of populism and we also speak of Trump's policies, mass media goes hand in hand with how populism is able to emerge within social systems. Because it is not that populism is a random happening or that we randomly got here. It is a process that goes hand in hand with how social systems organize themselves and also how mass media portrays the world to us. And so this also goes into the fact that mass media is shaped by the criteria of visibility and invisibility. So, of course, if mass media is now commodifying information, we will have conflict or emotional resonance and not specifically factual accuracy or comprehensiveness. It's more of a tool, I would say now, to make capital and be able to regenerate its own system. And not all, I wouldn't say not all media is in this way, but we are finding ourselves, I feel that we are entering a period where mass media is not really used to comprehend exactly all the structural situations that are happening, but more so just fast-paced information to sell the story, and people are not really understanding specifically the root of the problem or what's happening or how we got here in those developments. And this obviously, Luhmann draws attention to the circular feedback loop between media and its observers, and he talks about psychic systems, and these psychic systems are the individual and how they interpret the media through their own frameworks, as Hayles talked about having the self-organization and autopoiesis. And so this is then reintegrated into media narratives, shaping future coverage. And so it's almost as if, you know, these algorithms that are put out are able to then, I would say, know or be able to predict what the audience wants to see because of that emotional reaction or because of, you know, engagement and political reaction. And this is a recursive dynamic, and it amplifies certain themes. And I would say especially in conflict, polarization, and spectacle, because it generates more engagement and thus feedback into the system's self-reproduction. And this then ties to Baudrillard's spectacle, simulacra, and the collapse of meaning. And so his theory of simulation and simulacra, which is also in his writings of Simulacra and Simulation from 1981, he argues that contemporary society has entered a phase in which distinction between reality and representation collapses. And he calls this hyperreality. In this condition, signs and images, they no longer really refer to real objects or event, but instead they refer to other signs. So they form self-contained loops of meaning that mask the absence of the real referent. So for example, he distinguishes simulation between simulacra. So simulation is the representation that comes to function as a substitute of the real, and simulacra are copies without originals. So signs that circulate freely in culture, detached from any empirical material or grounding. So an example of this specifically important to this presentation, where I speak about Trump's immigration policies, is when, let's say, we see the word immigrant, or somebody who is following Trump's media or a Trump supporter sees the word immigrant, maybe they could refer to that word as a symbol of criminal. And so that input output doesn't really give any type of, you know, factual evidence, empirical evidence that this is true. And so this causes issues because instead of having truth, there are media spectacles, advertising slogans, and political imagery. And this creates an effect of reality that is more convincing, more coherent, and more emotionally resonant than actually lived experience. And he suggests that media no longer reports reality, but produces reality effects. And so what does that mean? Is that it's driven by repetition, spectacle, and, you know, mobilization of emotion. So fear, fascination, desire, outrage. And he talks about this as violence. It's not physical, but symbolic. And so he basically, the liquidation of meaning is violent, in which political participation and civic discourse becomes ritualized. So we're here as if we're doing, you know, performative activism or performative caring, when it's because that we have been replaced by the simulacra and no longer acknowledging the foundations of what is occurring. And so here in the quote, as he states, he says that political discourse mirrors advertising, in the sense, I vote, I participate, I'm concerned. In the same way as I buy, I consume, I take pleasure. And so when this happens, it's kind of a simulated engagement where democratic action becomes surface level identity performance. And so why does this matter? Because when we speak about populism, and I'll give you two definitions of populism, which are specifically from two scholars that are, I would say, leading scholars in the studies of populism, which is Kasmuda and Benjamin Moffat. And so Kasmuda claims populism is a thin-centered ideology that considers society to be ultimately separated into two homogeneous groups. And so there's two homogeneous and antagonist groups. So there's the pure people and then the corrupt elite, or sometimes even more dangerously, you know, a dangerous other. And it argues that politics should be the expression of general will of the people. Whereas Moffat says populism should be understood as a political style, a repertoire of performative features which cuts across ideological divides and is used to create political boundaries between people and the elite, and again, often the dangerous other. And so the diagram that I have made is basically showing that populism is a recursive effect. So it's an emergent effect arising from recursive feedback loops involving mass media, identity distinctions, and collective social anxieties within social systems. So here we have the social system loop. And so how it begins is usually there are economic, social, or environmental crises which generate social response. So either fear, resentment, or discontent, which are then framed by effective media narratives as us versus them. And this leads to the amplification of populist movements, which then further reinforces the system, because it is basically blaming one specific group for all the problems as linear cause and effect, rather than saying, okay, there are historical processes here. There are also many different reasons why this could potentially be a problem, but instead they immediately start blaming one specific antagonist group, whether that being the institutions, the education system, the pillars of knowledge that have been throughout years in a society, or it being minorities. And that's what we usually see with populist radical right parties. Now, populist radical left parties are a bit different. They go against, the billionaire elite and against liberal capitalism. But the populist radical right usually goes against minorities and the deep state. And this converges with mass media system, where it reinforces that populist that populist movement within the social system, because it's interacting between the social system while also interacting with the mass media, because it is the mass media that triggers the effects within the social system that reinforces the fear, the anger, and it interprets and processes these crises according to its own structure of the media, but then it re-enters the social system based on its own internal structures. And so fear, resentment, and discontent arise not simply because a crisis occurs, but because it's how a system registers and frames these events. And so this is to say that people vote for these leaders. People, this is not just happening randomly. People are, hearing these narratives and hearing this rhetoric from populist leaders and agreeing with it, or something calls to them about it. And it's because in a society, there are different social systems, and there will be people that, because of their self-organization or their beliefs, will align closely to these movements. And I mean, this goes in politics in general, but the fact that it's able to progress so much, I would say, is because the mass media system is, guided by the own logic of visibility and effective intensity. So it transforms these anxieties into simplified, emotional, resonant narratives. So again, that binary them versus us. And I would say that Baudrillard would incite into simulation and hyperreality that becomes crucial at this stage, because populist rhetoric, again, is amplified by media, and it's often not a reflection of social conditions, but of symbolic performance. Again, this rhetoric that specifically Trump uses against immigrants and for his immigration policy, there is no real empirical data that he's using to make these claims. He's just saying these claims, and he says them so many times, people start to believe them. The media starts to only choose specific images to portray what he's saying. He also specifically only posts certain images or rhetoric to amplify this. And these populist narratives then feed back into public perception and shaping these identity boundaries. And it shows that the process becomes self-reinforcing, because populist figures are amplified by media attention, which then boosts their visibility, and then paradoxically also their legitimacy. And this recursive loop creates a system that responds to its own outputs and intensifies populist dynamics, even in the absence of new inputs, because it becomes its own mechanism. And so if we specifically look at this model, these are three populist leaders from three specific populist radical right leaders, I would say, from three different continents. So we have Bolsonaro, which was the president of Brazil. We have Le Pen, who is one of the leading members of Rassemblement National in France. And we have President Trump. And so what all of these have in common is that they all have an in and out group. Bolsonaro specifically targeted indigenous Amazonian communities, and completely devastated the Amazon, and did not take into consideration any type of historical connection to the land, historical connection to the environment that Brazil holds. Le Pen does this through Islamophobia, with the immigration crisis since 2015 in Europe. And then Trump is now doing this with immigrants in general, but most specifically targeting Latino communities, which also have a big historical importance within American society and the economy. And so Trump's immigration policy and its error in linear causality. So this is a screenshot from the US Department of State website, and it's for their immigration policy, and it says protecting the American people against invasion. And so at the bottom, I've also cited several phrases that Trump has said, and this is from the Marshall Project, and it also counts the amount of times that this has been disseminated by Trump. And so, for example, he called them all, unauthorized immigrants are all criminals, and they're snakes that bite. They eat pets. They come from jails and mental institutions. They're stealing American public benefit and job. He needs to build a wall and make deportation acceptable because Eisenhower did it. So bringing also, past political figures to, I would say, kind of tell people, I'm doing this, but it's okay. Because this is why, and it's okay. And so there's a contradiction, this linear causal narrative, however, that it's not that immigrants equal crime and ignores the systemic complexity of American society. Specifically, he's treating America as a machine where the input is the immigrant and the output is the crime. But the real systems like immigration, law enforcement, and civil society are nonlinear, and they're self-organizing and complex. It also fails to recognize that the US system's response to immigration is shaped by internal structure. So legal norms, constitutional right, due process. Immigration is also viewed and processed differently in each subsystem. So in the law, it's legal, illegal. In politics, it's votes, power, media, visible, invisible. And within civil society, every subsystem and every state as well, because he forgets that we're in a federalist democracy, will react and view immigrants in a different way, depending on also what immigrants contribute to their society, to their state. And I think that this was specifically seen in California and what happened in California when the mass protests broke out and Trump actually did then send the National Guard, which is unconstitutional. But this is Trump's strategy through positive feedback loops. And so I've looked at 3 loops specifically. The executive power loop, so it's when he got elected, he then ignores laws. He issues illegal executive orders. He appoints federal workers who are loyal to him, and he also uses media, and he goes against the media and the educational institutions such as Harvard and other universities by threatening to cut public funding. And this all goes hand in hand with the mass media, because then mass media, he uses it as a tool where from information, he uses it to emotionally charge spectacle. And so basically he is disseminating these informations that all immigrants are criminals. People are burning the American flag. LA is on fire. We are in a war zone. I need to send the National Guard. And then he also targets ethnic groups where he specifically calls them aliens. And then this is writing immigration history because the United States is founded upon immigration. And also, the United States annexed Mexico, and the United States is also built upon 19% of its population is Latino, and it's the second biggest race in America, and African Americans are even below Latino. So he is just trying to rewrite the structure of a social system that is also composed of subsystems that are not going to specifically react to his actions in the way that he is claiming that it will be a linear cause and effect. And so these loops all together, they are productions of a simulation, Baudrillard would say. So the spectacle of, the spectacle of building a wall, fighting elites, or draining the swamp is more of a symbolic theater than effective governance. And we see this specifically also in the LA protests and their reentry. So here I have a picture of the American flag being burned, which is something that has been, when the LA protests happened, this is an image that was disseminated throughout all media. It was a key symbol of this protest. while also on the other side, you have the symbol of the National Guard being deployed without the consent of the California governor. And you have people protesting against his actions. And so just these two differences of using the American flag as a symbol of these people hate America, everyone who's protesting is, you know, an enemy of the state, they don't want what's good for you. And on the other hand, you have people who are working in negative feedback against his actions, saying, wait, we need to protect, you know, immigrants, who everyone should have due process. It is not all illegal immigrants are criminals. And so I think that this re-enters then into the idea of also the fact that he then states on the government Instagram. So this is a screenshot from the government Instagram where they made a reel of basically, you know, all the footage of violent protesting in LA to make it seem like it was only violent protesting. And he writes, while Los Angeles burns, officers ambushed, city in chaos, Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, and Maxine Waters call the riots and insurrection peaceful. And now I just want to put emphasis on insurrection and riots, because if you're an American citizen, or even if you just remember January 6th, when there was an insurrection at Capitol Hill, so he is specifically using words that also bring to point an actual attack on the state. And so he is trying to parallel these protests to an attack on the American state. And he says, these lefties don't care about your safety. They side with mobs. President Trump stands for law and order and will crush the chaos. And so just these words, they are, you know, very linear cause and effect. They're not explaining at all why there was violence, why there was tension when he deployed the National Guard, and he actually is the one who in his own actions caused chaos, and now he is claiming he is the one that can, you know, maintain the stability. And I thought that this was also absurd. So something came out where an article on CNN and also Times, basically, is the Department of Homeland Security considering a reality show where immigrants compete for U.S. citizenship? So I think that this ties specifically to Baudrillard, in the sense that we have arrived to a point where we are not, you know, we are filled with simulacra, so just symbols and images. And what is happening right now with the protests, people being deported, separated from their families, is merely parallel to a TV show, in the sense, a reality TV show where real people are competing for U.S. citizenship as if it was easy, as if the process was not, you know, getting paperwork, also seeking asylum, just all the levels that are part of the structural system in the immigration process within the United States. They are just completely making it, you know, unstructured, just linear, as if it was not that, you know, complicated. And so then when this happens, there are also negative feedback loops that we've seen. And so there's civil society response loop, institutional checks loops, and cultural resistant loops. And so this slide presents systemic pushbacks against authoritarian escalation. So there's media critique, legal checks, grassroots protests, etc. And Hayles would say that these negative feedback loops are crucial for maintaining homeostasis in a self-organizing system. So civil society, academia, courts, and state governments serve as stabilizing forces, absorbing crisis and triggering adaptive responses. And Luhmann would say that each subsystem reasserts operational closure. So for example, courts rule based on legality, not spectacle. Media diversifies and to offer counter narratives. So because in America, you know, we have free press and free speech, we also have outlets that are not going to specifically, you know, side with Trump's narrative or the government's narrative, and be able to also pick up independent stories that are essential for diversification. And I think that mechanism of withstanding authoritarianism, because it is the pillar of, you know, being able to stand up and speak your mind against those in power, is an important part of democracy. And also the civil institutions, they reclaim complexity against populist simplification. So for example, you know, we have the protests and people in communities saying, wait, we don't actually feel this way. We know people personally, who are immigrant families who contribute to our community. You have officials from states also saying, we will not side with this, as you are not giving due process to citizens. And this resistance could be used to avoid trying to become a mere image, so performative activism. And I would say that today it is very difficult for that. But I think that it's important that true resistance destabilizes the simulation by revealing that it is such, in the sense that counter narratives, legal wins, and grassroots organizing, they must resist the urge to mimic the spectacle of Trumpism. So speak outside the symbolic regime that he's constructed, and I think try to show that there are independent stories, that there is more complexity within society than what he is painting. And so this, I thought, was very interesting, going back to the insurrection. So what happened on January 6th and what has happened in the past weeks in the US with the protests against the immigration policy. And so, Trump pardoned most of the people that were convicted in January 6th. And so he's calling, peaceful protests when they wanted, this is just symbol that was around his hang Pence. They were looking for Pence, and, they had guns. 5 officers were killed in this, they call protest, but in this insurrection, which was also ruled by a court. And then he calls violent insurrectioners the people who are protesting also, non-violently, because most of the protests, yes, there were riots at night, but there was a curfew set by the governor and by the mayor of Los Angeles, and most of the protests were peaceful. And so he is trying to completely alter what was happening on the ground to serve his own system and to serve his own power, to be able to gain authority in saying, okay, this is what's happening, even though there is no factual evidence or concrete evidence that this is, the actual story, but this is what I think, and this is what the narrative I'm putting out to reinforce his own system of power, and that is moving the United States to, I would say, an illiberal democracy. Some people are fearing that it's becoming authoritarianism, but I still have hope that the subsystems and the civil society will be able to withstand this phase, just because of all the pillars within American society, the Constitution, and just the real pillars behind the Constitution that he is trying to, I think, overwrite. And so what happens next? And so I take Hayles' new book, which is Bacteria to AI, Human Futures with Our Non-Human Symbionts, and she talks about ecological rationality. So there is also a critique that is important to do, I would say, about liberalism, and I would say the neoliberal also model of capitalism. But it's important to remember that liberal states, and specifically the United States, has also, not been democratic in its foreign affairs. And so, for example, in the turn of this century, Fukuyama wrote a piece called The End of History, which he regarded liberalism to be the last ideology that had defeated communism and fascism. And now most countries would evolve into a liberal model of government, because also of, we have free trade, we are globalized, and with the digitalization, there was a hope that we would be able to, to be able to have feedback within ideas, and that people would turn towards a liberal model. But as we've seen, many regimes, China and the Gulf countries, have adapted this model to their own. And so they have adapted their model to what is called capitalistic authoritarianism, where they still partake in the free market, but they remain authoritarian. And so Hayles criticizes political liberalism in the sense that it's because it assumes that human beings are independent, rational individuals, and that decision-making is done by autonomous subjects. So politics is based on individual rights, contracts, and freedoms. And it separates humans as individuals without taking into account nature and now technology as also, part of this process by placing humans as masters of the environment. And I think that this specifically is also tied to capitalism as an economic model. And so she sees this as outdated and a dangerous view, and specifically in the context of ecological crisis, but also in global interdependence. And so she says this worldview can't help us deal with planetary scale problems like climate change, algorithmic governance, and mass misinformation. And so what is ecological relationality? So basically, she claims that we humans, we're not isolated individuals, but part of a web of relationships with animals, ecosystems, machines, media, and institutions. And so cognition and agency are distributed. It's not just in human minds, but in systems like governments, social movements, AIs, infrastructure. So as we said, all subsystems are self-organized. And the world operates through complex interdependent systems, not individual actions. And so we should replace the own rational subject with cognitive ecology, which is, she calls cognitive assemblages, a network of interacting entities, both human and non-human. Because now that we have entered a phase where we are constantly met with algorithms, constantly met with mass media as one of the main sources of our information, there are, technologies, institutions, and environmental forces that also think, not in the way a human thinks, but in the way that involve perception, decision-making, and feedback, and how that re-enters humans. And so I would say that she suggests that change will come from reconfiguring an entire assemblages, so civic, technical, institutional, and ecological. And so the goal is not to return to liberal stability, but to build adaptive relational systems that can respond to ongoing crisis. So kind of what happened, the question, what happens next? Should we go back to, liberal reasoning and the return of stable politics, or should there be an emergence of new ecological relational assemblages, so networks of humans, technologies, institutions, and environments that co-adapt and evolve? And I guess some questions I have for you all is, what does Trump's rule and Trump's agency within US democracy, but also how it has affected social systems within the US, what does it mean for the future of liberal, democratic, social, and political systems? And I would say this specifically would be a question for what is the future of also Europe with the rise of populist radical right parties and the immigration crisis that has been happening since 2015, but also the failure of institutions to be able to plan and to be able to adapt, to take repercussions, and not just repercussions, but be able to organize a type of system that is effective. And can liberal democracy compete with rising narratives and control of authoritarian capitalistic regimes without morphing into the same organizational structure?
Finished.
Yes, I think.
Thank you, Aviv, very much. So rich, and I'm sure that we have a lot of questions. I have many, but I would like to listen to the others, especially the Americans here, who might have some kind of urgency to react on what's happening. I see you're all muted. I don't know why. Okay, you have questions?
I could start if there's no one else. Aviv, this is really quite extraordinary, and I appreciate so much that you're talking about counteraction, or at least carving a path toward counteraction. I love the diagrams you have, and I would love to study them further, and also encourage explicitly including in them the algorithms that are behind the loops that you're talking about. That's a particular interest of mine, hence my mentioning it, but if you're looking for a conversation about where the algorithms go inside the loops that you show, I would welcome that, and please feel free to get in touch with me. There's a character in the American Society for Cybernetics for a long time who worked in government and is also part of a group in Washington, D.C., talking about a forum for democracy. And you've provided more practical ways forward for action than I've seen from that group, although I don't wish to name names, but I appreciate a lot the passion and the intelligence that you're bringing to this. And I would encourage you to keep going. And if I can help in any way, please let me know. I don't really have a question, but I do know that a number of forces are interested in what you're talking about. And I think there would be ways, for example, this Forum for Democracy in DC might be interested in your work. Andy Pickering, whose name you probably know, is also about to give a talk at the Cybernetic Society in England about his views of what cybernetics has or has not accomplished lately. And he has some interesting ways of putting it. And I think you would be encouraged to hear the specifics that you're talking about, as am I. And so just really a thank you at this point, and an offer if further conversation would be of interest. I'd love to get into it. There's so much more one can say, but that would be my comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot. And I think that it's difficult. I mean, personally, because I don't know, I'm 22, and so I was in high school when Trump first became president on his first term. And I'm an immigrant. I was on a green card. My dad, was a professor at a university, and we waited 7 years, did the whole process to become citizens.
Wow. Yeah.
And so it's difficult for me to, and now I live in Europe because I'm also half Italian. And so it's difficult for me because I feel that I have escaped this happening by being in another continent. But I also fear that what is happening in the US is so important because it will affect the whole world. And we are seeing also with what's happening in the Middle East and also certain governments around the world, they are taking, not that they're taking this as a playbook, but I fear that it will be used as a playbook elsewhere, because these parties, they learn and they use from each other, because they are also in a feedback system with each other through their rhetoric and through, alliances. And so, yeah, I think, as you said, it's important to speak about this and find also other ways to be able to describe what's happening outside of the media.
Yes. Thank you.
Be clear.
Yeah. Can I chime in?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So I'll echo much of what Paul said, at least the spirit of it as I heard it. I'm really impressed with this. I don't think this is an undergraduate thesis. I think it's a doctoral dissertation. And I think I'm impressed with how articulate you are, how informed in pulling in some difficult concepts about really important issues, and doing so in a way that is just remarkable and also clearly passionate. So when you talk about it, you might want to slow down just a little bit, so that people have a chance to take a breath and follow it. Now, having said that, and having been involved in cybernetics for 50 plus years, but also having involved with national political issues and international security in the United States and on global affairs, you've captured an awful lot of really complex interactions, and you're clearly informed about it, and you don't have to refer to notes to be able to pull things together that for most people are really, really complicated to be able to make clear. what I do think is that I guess a couple of comments would be, one, I think Hayles does very good work and pulls together lots of insights, but she is generally pulling together insights from others as well as adding on. So her work on second order cybernetics, et cetera, is a recapitulation of things that Heinz and others have said, and accurately so. But her then pulling together, for example, cognitive assemblages and focusing on the fact that the ability of human beings is not totally unique, especially in terms of the ability to process information, the privilege that goes to human beings, at least implicitly in an anthropomorphic sense of how humans interact with technologies that we create, as well as other kinds of organisms, as well as non-organismic, but the material aspects of society. Absolutely spot on in terms of emphasis. She does it in a way that a lot of other, I think, bring great insight that a lot of other people don't really emphasize. I disagree with some of her conclusions and attributions, and but I think she does very good work. And I just don't know many people who would have pulled it together as well as you have and weave it in with other things. I'm working on some stuff on this myself, so I want to follow up with you. I want to read your thesis. I don't want just a slideshow, if it's available in English. But I do think part of what goes at discussions about pulling together these political and cultural and societal realities in the United States and in the world, and I would agree, what happens in the United States, because of the United States, has enormous impact way beyond our shores because of the nature of the world, because of our size, because of our history, because of a lot of other reasons, some of which are good, some of which are not good, as speaking as an American and speaking as a global citizen as well, both. I think one of the key points that most cyberneticians don't pay enough attention to, although Andy Pickering is starting to, and some others, is really the significance of human agency, the ability to actually do things. And human agency, as far as I'm concerned, and I've made the point in most of my recent work, it's the most profound emergent phenomenon in the known universe. Not unique. There are other phenomena that also have some levels of agency and the ability to influence not only themselves but others in terms of undertaking action. But it is so amplified, the abilities of our species and to be able to deal with the world and do so without having to pay attention to the same constraints in terms of physical constraints or biological constraints, and that's why it's significant. So there's that element in there. When you also then start taking a look at agency, and I'm offering this as a thought for you to consider as you proceed with your studies and carry this work further, is that this gets right at the heart of issues of democracy and freedom and authoritarianism, because in essence, there's been a dynamic throughout human history of how you exercise autonomy and agency, and which we are then talking about ourselves. It's not just some other, but it's us that we're trying to wrestle with. And in essence, there's two basic strategies. Either you can maximize your own agency and autonomy and suppress everybody else's variety and autonomy, or you can give into it, in which case they're trying to exercise it. And that's a dynamic where it's all about power. It's all about requisite variety, forcing things. And the other approach, which has evolved over the last several thousand years, but especially over the last 500 years, is the tension where you have increasing ability of individual autonomous human beings to exercise their freedom and negotiate the interactions rather than being submitting to or being subordinate to the law of the jungle. So what happens with the emergence of greater and greater freedom, or what has happened as a result of the greater emergence of freedom and autonomy, has been a burst of creativity, which in the last 500 years has created the modern world, and is then having a huge impact on not only our species, but the rest of the planet and the world that we inhabit. So these tensions between how you handle and balance individual autonomy and power vis-a-vis a whole lot of other people having the ability to do so. And I, for one, and I'll close with this comment, I think I'm not interested in anybody telling me what to do. And I don't care whether it be the populist right or the populist left, whether it be the MAGAs or the wokes, and I'm willing to negotiate. And so there's this element when you get into this, your specific question, not only you've done a really good job of laying out feedback loops and interconnections and how some feed others and the role of the modern, media, which doesn't crop up in the same way in most of the other conversations that I've seen with cyberneticians and system scientists. But this emphasis on agency, what I would argue is a little more emphasis on agency and autonomy, and it gets at these issues of authoritarianism and freedom and democracy in ways that are consistent with Hayles' comments, which I'm referencing because you specifically highlighted her work. And I'm actually just finishing her book, her bacteria book, right now. It's not just human beings vis-a-vis human beings. It's vis-a-vis other forms of life. It's vis-a-vis the conditions and resources on the planet, but also these technical assemblages. And I like her notion of cognitive assemblages as a way of at least beginning to examine that nature. We've created much of the world that we inhabit now, and that has changed how we interact and what we do. And to me, I think this tension between, as you said very nicely, these dual crises, environmental breakdown and fragmentation of social cohesion. We have a bunch of people-centric challenges, and we have a bunch of planetary-centric challenges that are all part of the Anthropocene as far as I'm concerned, and we have to address all of them. It's not like we only address one of them, etc. So you've done a marvelous job here in terms of being lay this out, and it's in ways that certainly Paul would be very articulate about and sensitive. It lays out many opportunities for conversation. And you expressed it in a way that, makes it easier to see where you could have a conversation. So I could take any one of your slides, and I'm sure the other participants sitting in today could take a look at any of your other slides and the points that you've raised, and there'd be all kinds of rich conversations coming out about really important points. I do think the overarching point of how we handle the growing authoritarianism, while at the same time addressing the very real environmental and broader planetary-centric issues. This is not a surprise. As conditions get heated and we start running into resource constraints and a variety of other concerns, people are going to not have the requisite variety to be able to handle it the way they want. And so there's going to be increased friction, and the easiest way for most people to address that, and most societies to address that, has been, in time of crisis, in time of threat, in time of pressure, is to revert to exercising more and more power. Okay, I don't want to have to deal with these issues. It's too complicated. I can't get what I need. And they're getting scared. So you get into discussions about cognitive mindsets and the emotional brain versus the rational brain and how we handle and construct information. So there's a lot here that's worth carrying further, I guess would be my point. And I, for one, would like to stay in touch. This has been much richer than many of the conversations and presentations that I've seen certainly in the last 5 years on these kinds of topics. So congrats.
Thank you so much for your kind words. And I agree. I think that agency is so important, which is why I'm so interested also in grassroots developments. And I do think that it's important to not overlook the human agency, in the sense also, as I said before, these people come to power because people voted for them. People chose to agree with their policies, or something that they said resonated with them. And I think that this also has to do with, historical ties in the social system. And in America specifically, I also think the history of America and its creation has not, I grew up in Indiana, in Bloomington, Indiana. And so it's a very red state. And I would say that even though I grew up in Monroe County, which is a very blue district, I would say that when it comes to talking about the history of the United States and its, slavery, or even just, Columbus and in general, I just think that we have not really dealt with our history in a way that I think, and not that in a way that I think we won't be able to move forward, but I think that why we still have xenophobia and these problems within our social systems, even when specific subsystems have been around the whole time, or they have very, very important ties to society, we still have that conflict. And I think that that's very important as well, is that human agency. I think focusing on the human agency that wants to do good, that wants to, save the planet and kind of find a way to adapt the crisis in a way that doesn't just result in authoritarianism or in control. So, but I would love to work with you. And if you want, I didn't write a thesis on this specifically. I wrote a thesis on something much more complex, which is the Israel-Hamas war that's happening. But if you want, I will send that to you gladly if you would like to read it. But yeah, thank you so much for your comment.
Let me make one other point, just as feedback.
Other question.
Okay.
Sorry, Bill, I interrupted you.
I just wanted to say that I wanted to reinforce a point in that little conversation back and forth, not only Paul made. This is a global group right here. If I look around the room, okay, most Americans and Italians at least, and others, you're in Spain now. This is the issue facing the United States is not just an American problem. No, it's a human issue, and there's all kinds of benefits from having that be a global conversation, even though, of course, authoritarians, especially Trump and others, would like to do as much as they can to dampen cosmopolitanism and have things be global. In fact, this is a broad fact. So it's not going to be resolved and addressed and improved simply by Americans sorting it out. Yeah. It has, we're all involved in this together. So and the fact that you're American and Italian and background and focus, that itself gives you some insights. So anyway, this was great.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions?
Can I pose a question, please?
I see. Diva.
Yeah.
Diva.
Good evening. Thank you so much for your dissertation. It was very, very interesting. I was wondering if by chance you have maybe thought about differences in the several reactions to the democratic complex system or functioning system you were referring to, due to the age of the stakeholders, because I am a little bit elder and you're quite young. So it's interesting if in your mind you have this difference, this possible differences.
Yes. So I also think that this is, if we look at also like quantitative data on, let's say, voters, and we are seeing that younger generations are actually turning towards authoritarianism in their voter behavior. And this is specifically in the West. And I think that this has to do with also how much my generation spends time on our cell phones and on social media. And I do think that in the United States, there is a big, I think in general in the West, even Europe, there is a big agency in protest in the youth. But I fear that it is not that all of it is performative, but I do think that my generation gets into, because of social media and because of mass media, into not performative activism, but maybe they are protesting something they don't truly understand completely. And I think that this is also because of the education system, because of several things. And so I do think that personally, of course, I think that we should focus on the youth, educating the youth, and because we are the future, of course. But I do think that maybe the way that older generations view what's happening or also react to what's happening is very different, because you have also lived, I don't know, the beginning of the 21st century, right? And I was born in 2002. So I just think that also that the amount of difference that there has been from post-Cold War to now in such a short period of time is, I don't know if it's, for me, it's scary. I don't know for you all that you've seen it happening, but yeah, I think that there is a difference between how the youth reacts to this and also how older generations. But also, I do think that depending on where we speak about, but in the United States, I know a lot of people my age who are MAGA supporters, regardless of January 6th, regardless of him being, having 37 federal charges, against him and being indicted. And this is also a problem, I think. So I don't know if that answered, but
yes, surely. And by the fact, I was thinking we're ongoing to the revision of the Agenda 2030 of the UN. In 3 years, we have to write the new one. And I'm really wondering, what will we write on that new agenda? And for me, it's very important that younger generations write something on it.
yes.
I don't know if you agree with this.
Yes, I think that it is important to involve the youth in these conversations, because I think that, of course, we also are part of the system, but also these, at least the criteria that will be written will affect us mostly, right? Our future, my children, I don't know if I have children, but if, the generations to come. The only problem is I fear, and also from my studies in political science, we see that there is a drawback with people like the youth voting, right, and being political. And this is where when I speak about like performative activism, it's where I stress that, okay, again, with the mass media, the visibility and non-visibility, I feel like my generation is very prone to the algorithms that tell you what you should be caring about. And the lower South is not one of them, in the sense that the Southern Hemisphere is not one of the things that I feel my generation is thinking of. And this obviously also has, I would say, like colonial ties to it or something, at least in the West. But I just think that we aren't also focusing on the environment now, because there's so much social chaos, in the sense that the environment is being sidelined once again because we have political conflict. And so, yeah, I don't know what will happen, but
yes, no, this is a very important point. Diva is an activist in the educational field. And well, the fact that the youth, if I understand you were, Aviv, you said that the youth do not protest in a complete consciousness, that they're not completely aware of what they're doing. But youth are never aware, completely aware of what they're doing. Yes. I mean, that they are called youth exactly because they perform before understanding. If we wait to understand all the details and the causes and the systemic relationships before acting, I think we would never act. Anyway, it's just a side comment. I don't know if there are other questions. I have one. Miltos, I see you. Maybe you have a question or a comment. I know that you are.
Unfortunately, I missed her talk, Aviv's talk, because I got locked outside of our house. So we had to find a way to get into the house. So we arrived late, but I'm going to listen to it in the recording. So I missed it. What about Israel-Palestine? Did anyone talk about that? Did Aviv talk about this? No, she didn't touch that subject.
I think that what is happening in the United States is like, I'm not saying that it's clearly the same model of what's happening now, but I think that in the conflict, at least, I wrote my thesis on this, and it's very complex, so I don't think I'll have time to speak about it for
another seminar.
But I do think that there is that, again, simplified narrative of the conflict. And this conflict is, I would say it's different than in the United States. It's a bit different because it's had a lot of mediatic attention, of course. And it's been, 2 years now, around 2 years that this terrible, war has started. And just this war, of course, without taking into consideration the years of the conflict and all that has led to this moment. And so I think that it's important, again, to look at this conflict in a way that does not simplify it as to just, Israel, Hamas, because there are many different layers in the conflict. There's the occupation in the West Bank. There is even the layers within Israeli society, the diaspora of Jewish citizens, the diaspora of Arab Israeli citizens. We also have how Hamas works, how the PLO works, how the Arab countries are involved, Egypt, Jordan, the Gulf countries, Iran. It's very complex in the United States and also Europe. And it's also, I would say, very simplified in the media, but I think it's so important for there to be some type of resolution, for this to be looked at in a way that is not simplified, that is complex, and that also recognizes that it did not just happen randomly on October 7th. This happened because of several different effects from several different actions in the past and policies. Also, the United States, war in the Middle East through the Bush administration. I just think that there's a lot of different mechanisms that go into the war and the conflict. But I specifically was more interested in the grassroots developments within Israel and also the activists on the Palestinian side, where we look at the individual citizens who are affected by this conflict and what they have to say and what they want. And not what the government wants, because we're not in a democracy anymore. Bibi Netanyahu's government is not a democracy anymore. And I think that we should not let the authoritarian powers dictate the narrative. I think it's important to allow the public, individual citizens that are specifically in the system, in the war, to be able to voice what they want. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, actually, the problem with Trump and with Israel now, they are closely connected.
They are now, yes,
dangerously connected.
Yes.
With an increase of complexity, a feedback loop or escalation. The escalation.
Everybody in America was always connected anyway. I mean, again, this story with Trump is just like a more cartoonish image of the same face we see in America from always, right? It's like a very compact attitude, the American one. Trump makes it more cartoonish and more like gamification, let's call it this way. Just a question. Do you have an Instagram? Because I looked to find your Instagram, I couldn't find you.
Yes, I have Instagram, but it's not for like, I would say academic purposes, but I can just send it here if you would like.
Okay.
But I
But
mostly,
are you active on Instagram? Do you see this this old already for maybe for your generation social
yes,
media act like
yes,
which now I learned that they are becoming obligatory. Actually, the government directed the universities to check, at least for the foreigners, if they do have an Instagram account. If they don't, they are already suspicious for them. You are
yes,
suspect if you don't have an Instagram account, or you have a dormant one and you don't express yourself publicly, it means you're hiding something. So
yes.
do you
I
see this like
I
as a
don't
place to
like,
act?
personally, this is, I don't know what you all have an opinion on this, but personally, I don't like to post political opinions on Instagram. And I know that this is just my personal view, because I use Instagram to post pictures of my life and I don't know, follow my friends. I do follow Instagram accounts that obviously like news Instagram accounts or like grassroots groups. But don't um I don't I don't like to get into, now at least, conversations online, just messaging about political happenings, because I think that now, specifically, at least from what I see, is that if you look at the comments, or if you, I don't know, I have a private account, but let's say I had a public account and I posted something that was maybe pro more one thing, I feel like there's people are able to say whatever they want and can say hate comments, and there's not really a check. And so by reading these comments on other people's pages, I'm not that I'm scared, but I don't feel comfortable interacting with this. I didn't know that in the United States now, if you don't have an Instagram account and you don't post, like, they're suspicious of you. I didn't know that, and I don't think that that's valid, however, because I don't think it's fair to like impose social media on people just because it's like the norm,
Yeah, it's a new thing. It's a new directive they send the government sent to universities and stuff. So it's a new thing. But
Wow.
one thing I want to ask you. So practically, you are not on Instagram. You're not on all these big social media. Is there any other alternative social media that you are following, or you are not political in any of these piazzas, in any of these like squares?
Well, I have Instagram, and I've had Instagram since I was 14 in America. Like in high school, we all had Instagram. I feel like it was a big thing when I was growing up. I look at political discourse. I observe, but I don't interact specifically on the social media. I prefer to observe it and then analyze it, but I don't know. I don't know. I don't use it. I don't use it as a political platform, I guess. I use it more for like personal.
Yeah, no, this I understood this perfectly. But can I ask you something? Do you think that in terms of propaganda and seriousness, the Trump people, all these, let's call them enemies, right? If the enemies are they doing a good job, or you think they are doing like a bad job or a mediocre job? Do you think they are doing something maybe excellent, or like hyper good in terms of quality of their job in
Okay.
social media and all these things? How would you value them, like in a scale of 10? Are they doing like a 10? Are they doing a 3 or a 2?
I
What kind
think
of enemy do we have?
I think it's 5, because I do think that there
5?
are, yeah, I do think that there are, like, personally, because, okay, so maybe because of how I see it, and because I read so much Luhmann, and I also love The Global Village by Marshall McLuhan. And so I'm very critical of like what the politicians specifically are saying, and also what they are doing to promote you know,
No, excuse me. Sorry to interrupt you. When I say a good job, I don't mean the quality, the way we look on the quality of their job. I mean, like on their purpose, which one of the purposes, how to kill a lot of people in ways that the democracy then is all the ways to oppose it, to oppose this massacre. It's actually useless, and it even helps the next massacre. And things like this, how to make that the people agree or they disagree in ways that you can make gamification or then on their disagreement and turn it to your benefit. Is their job like okay, there are people that would call this devilish or whatever, but actually it's a modus operandi. They are doing a job. They're making a purpose. You can call it fascist, you can call it whatever you want.
Yes.
But I mean, it serves their purposes. How would you value their purposes?
I would say, well, who are we talking about? If I'm talking about like Benjamin, like Bibi, I would say he's doing an awful job at his campaign to, like, if you're talking about social media and like promoting the war, I think that he is doing. I think
he's still ruling. He
right, but if you look,
he has his government. I mean,
but this isn't. But I wouldn't say that this is because of public opinion. If you actually look at public opinion within Israel, like over 70% don't want the war, and
really?
there were, yeah, and there were,
and he keeps them like he keeps them so like silent. 70% of the people.
I mean, there's protests every Saturday for 2 years.
Isn't it then something wrong on the protest? I mean, when people are protesting, excuse me just a second, because I was very involved with all the Assange protests and all these things, right? There is no human being that has been defended more than Julian Assange in the planet for many years. You know what we succeed with the protests? Zero, nothing. Julian Assange did not came out of prison because of the protests and all of this. You know, to who were useful all these protests? To the enemy, right? Who I think was doing and is doing like an excellent job, because they have the control, and this is growing. It's a complex job. It's a scientific one. It is a funny one. They make it with a lot of humor. They make it wonderfully. Like, you can go and you are not following Instagram, but did it occur to you to follow their social media? The Truth one, I don't know, all these things. I am following them. They are having lots of fun. You know what? There are hundreds of thousands of people today that they believe that Assange was actually a spy for them, for Trump. Okay, so they are doing a great job of propaganda. If you step out completely from social media, you go on putting your private friends and like birthdays and all these things. Do you think, I understand that go there and try to make political discourse with the terms of political discourse of the old left, of all these like accusations, which is practically a prolongation of what is happening in the demonstrations, right? Which, in my view, they are ridiculous. When you go on the demonstration and you demonstrate in all these things, like, oh, bloody Zionists, flags of Palestinians and all these things, it's like totally ridiculous. The most wonderful thing for your enemy to use when your enemy professionally and very intelligently is like spending a lot of effort and a lot of genius, because they are genius people, right? Or you don't think they are genius? You think that someone like Donald Trump is like some...
Let me clarify. If I understand Mythos, I think he means, is the enemy successful? Is the enemy reaching what they want? And are the people who demonstrate against Netanyahu or Trump successful? Are they reaching their goals? I think that Mythos makes a lot of sense. That is, successful means how close to their goals they can go, how close to their goals the demonstration people go. As a matter of fact, going back to hyper reality, and then I'll have my question about that. Actually, it seems that Trump, the cartoonish Trump, is successful. it is awful, of course. Not, let's distinguish between the value and the consequences, the feedback loop, the escalation, and the ability to reach a goal. What do you think?
So I think obviously that with the prolongation of the wars and also what's happening in the United States with Trump's obviously not facing any type of legal action against him. Obviously, federal courts, yes, ruled against like a lot of his policies, but specifically him like being impeached for overruling the Constitution has not happened. But I think that, yes, okay, the protests have not brought anything, and the enemy or the other side can use the protests to, you know, say bad things about your movement or trying to like delegitimize what you're trying to protest for or against. But I don't know specifically if that's like, I don't think that that's the protest's fault. Like, I think that that's because we have like political powers in place that are benefiting from the suffering of others. So if we have these people in power and these mechanisms in power, and specifically in regards to the war in Gaza right now, you know, there's a lot of economic gain from this war for other actors that are not specifically
because
locally.
it is professional for them.
Of
For them,
course,
it's professional.
also,
For us, it's amateur. And we
But
make
I-
it in an amateur way, like in a sentimental amateur way, which is the worst thing we can do. Every protest brings out there what? Trials, statistics, how to pass a new law against violence and things like this, right? So if we continue to do the protests that way, we are the biggest losers of humanity, right? What will be remembered, not that they are the biggest criminals of humanity, what the protests are fantasizing, but that we are the biggest losers, even bigger than the whole left altogether, right?
Yes.
So now, if you, the young people, you step out of the social media and you don't invent new ways to make it funny, gamification, interesting, as much interesting at least as they are doing, so then we are completely lost from that side of the social media, which, by the way, it matters because it's where they actually play, right?
Right.
So,
but I also think that depending where you're looking from in your algorithm and what social system you're a part of, you will think very different things. Like, for example, I think that, let's say if we're talking about Israel and Palestine, and, you know, there's like pro-Palestine or pro-Israel, like the polarization of sides. I think that personally, from what I see, I think that the pro-Palestine footage on social media is actually working more in the social sphere. I'm not saying that in the political sphere of like decision making, this is having some type of influence on what's happening, because nothing has really changed. But I do think from a social level of how people view this conflict, I do think that it has, you know, brought the issue of like Palestine and the self-determination of Palestinians and the Israeli occupation to the table. Because if before, I mean, not that nobody cared, but again, the visibility, I mean, you know, nobody cared that Bibi started becoming more authoritarian and that he wanted to change the judicial system and place more settlements in the West Bank. Nobody talked about that, right? And so I think that now these movements on social media are allowing for this to for there to be a conversation. Now, with regards to whether the protests work, the protests in Israel are not doing anything. But I'm saying that if there was democracy, if there was real democracy and real feedback within a government, and the government who is elected for the people realizes that,
but there is not, and there will not be. There is not, and there will not be. Another thing important, sorry, because I do have an Instagram account which is completely philo Netanyahu. How did I done it? I open an account and then I connect only with Netanyahu pro people, right? Once you look the world through that account, then it's interesting because you see a whole other world. When you start making pro-Netanyahu comments, when you start going with the system, you create friends. You know how many friends I have from, let's say, the robotized enemies? A lot, thousands. I did the same with Donald Trump. So I do operate in two, very funny for me, because it's very funny to go there to do that job. But it's also very enlightening because you see the world not through our eyes, you see it through their eyes, and you see a whole other world out there. Once you see them and once you know them, then you can also start operating there. You're not going to go there, teach them that they are wrong. You're going to do other kind of considerations, and maybe you will make other machinations. If you do this like in a group way, then it's interesting. That's why I ask you, you step out of social media, but are you doing any job on social media? Because I think that for your generation, there's like a ton of job to do on social media. Do exactly with the spirit of them. Not forget that they are the avant-garde. They know better their McLuhan because they have not read it. They experience it. Who is the best influencer in America? Donald Trump. Who is the expert? Who McLuhan would be like, okay, now you take the award to Donald Trump. He's the best. He did it. He did it fantastically. He did it again and again and again, and he's gonna continue doing it. And after him, his kids, right? Right. It is like this. As for Netanyahu, first-class player. I mean, it's like only respect to him, right? You have to give them that credit because if you don't, you lose, and you're gonna lose. Wait for democracy. No. Wait for democracy. Yeah. What democracy? There is no such a thing. Not even the promise.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Would you say so? You're speaking. What about the people that are in Israel, that live in Israel, and that are against the government? So they don't need. They don't need.
They don't new ways.
No, but I know, but they don't need to be in the conversation on social media because they are experiencing it. No. Like they are experiencing what he is saying and what he is doing, and they are seeing what is happening in their own system. So I think
how do they communicate it to us? What kind of relation do we have with these people? Who are these people?
That's exactly what I mean. That I think that that's why it's important to give those people voice, and the mass media doesn't really let those people have a voice. Because
wait. Why shall the mass media let these people have a voice, right? The mass media are not from your side.
They will never.
Okay. Great. But the platform.
So we can
have
but the platform is there, right? What stops these people from getting the platform?
But he was also voted. That's another thing that I want to explain is that this is also not like he did not just randomly appear. Like Israeli people voted for him over the years. So this is why I'm saying that it's also a societal problem, just like with Trump, is that people voted for him. So now that people don't really want him, but also he is different because he has a coalition with the religious Zionist party, which is also only 1% of the population. So, the fact that democratic system allowed that to happen, that coalition to happen, although it's a minority, is also a problem. I really hope that social media is not the only way that we can solve these problems, but I guess you're right that maybe it is the only way. Not the only way. Not the only way, but
it's a big place, right? It's a big place that if you let it for them, then you are fucked like big time. So, second, it's a big place where you can start a new attitude, a new way, right? It's more easy to start it like in social media, like simply what I am doing, if like many Israeli people were doing it, if they had like a double life, right, then how great that would be, right? Because you can use new humor to individualize, to find, oh, this guy is doing the same as me. You create micro groups there. These micro groups, they can really affect society because instead, for example, what do I do in the social media of Trump? Okay, I'm there and I look like the most stupid Trumpist. I put yes, yes, yes to everything. Then what do? I write things such as, look how stupid New York Times is. It says so many people will die. And, oh, that's the most idiotic thing I ever had. But I put a link, right? So somebody clicks on the link. So you can find ways to actually pass information when you go through their wave. Also, these things can protect you because next time you go to America and they stop you, they say, open your computer. I say, yeah, of course, I'm like super Trumpist. Here I am. It's like you need these things because new life is coming out there. You need to be prepared. It's more important this than go like and scream Palestine, Palestine, which is absolutely ridiculous. Also like Palestine, what? Right? You cannot use that. You cannot use the flags of Palestine because they're the flags of other killers that they sacrifice their kids and stuff like that. You don't want to be that way. How do you want to be? You can find out with new ways. Like me, I'm already old. Why you, the young people, you are not doing this? Guys, big time.
Because we are stuck in the narratives that the two, let's say, like you say Bibi and you talk about like Hamas or Qatar propaganda. I feel like we are stuck in there. Like we do not go into the other, you know.
Why? Yeah, I know you're stuck, but why you're stuck? What keeps you stuck?
Because I think that we are, because, you know, we are young, like not that we are young and we are more emotional, but I think that we are like, we don't want to go, like people don't want to go there. You know, people don't want to go there because what they see, they don't like. Excuse.
I don't know. No good excuse. Because you don't know how to have fun. Because you are already programmed victims of the fun is already configured by others, right? By my generation, by the generation before, the more back you go to generation, we were finding out how to have fun. Now you are waiting from others to give you how to have fun, right? So what the left and the cool people are giving you, they give you like already ready-made fun. We're gonna go to have fun to the protests. Okay, it's not that funny and actually not good.
I also don't go. I have never. I don't go.
Right, but that's not like a solution. It's not that you throw away the protest without inventing something. Right. So you need to invent new modus operandi to create societies, to create a revolution of some kind that will not look like the old revolution.
Right. But also what I do follow, let's say specifically regarding like Israel, Palestine, I follow a lot of activists and grassroots groups in Israel. So for example, Breaking the Silence, B'Tselem, Standing Together, okay, which are all groups that use social media to promote like a message of, you know, okay, Standing Together works also on the ground with it's Arab Israelis and Jews together, you know, working against the occupation. Breaking the Silence is officers from the IDF that speak out against what they've seen in the West Bank. And they are constantly speaking out against the government. So I do think that there are these types of groups, but it's not, and Standing Together is young people, but I do think that it's adults. And also there's also a Unacceptable on Instagram, which is like defending Israeli democracy. And they made a documentary about Bibi called the Bibi Files. Did you see the Bibi Files?
No, I have not. I will see it. No, absolutely. What you are doing in that way, that's absolutely correct. But it has at the same time, even to educate those people, those activists, that we need another way because it's becoming too boring and also too obsessive. And like, you know what? Killing is fun. Unfortunately, it is fun, at least for guys like me, for men, right? And like for women, maybe less. Men, we are just like machines that what we like to see more is violence and fun. From wherever they stand, from the left, from the right, from the good, from the peaceful, from the yogi, from the Dalai Lama people, they are all people with beards that when they see killing and blood, that's like the programming of men. Okay, so to this kind of people, you have, and specifically the women also, right? They have to be clever. They have to use new ways how to be clever, how to drive these beasts, right? Us men to their own purposes. I hope your purposes are less like beastly. So if they are less beastly, you have to prove it to us. Otherwise, until now, it's just suicidal and is actually your fun of suiciding. Men, we have the fun, and what I see now until now is that the men, we have the fun of see the violence, and women, they have the fun of committing suicide. Boom, which is actually a classic, also like Masada kind of thing, right? Let's throw ourselves from the rock and die. It's
Okay,
also
no,
in,
if
yeah,
I can manage to say one word. No, it's an
yes, please.
interesting conversation. I think that what Miltos brings about here is a very important point. That is, we are failing. Okay, Trump, we may have a war tomorrow. So it means that these protests and organizations that counter the hyper reality of Trump and Trumpism and Netanyahu and simplified narratives, as you have analyzed very well, the hyper reality is winning. Okay, it is a matter of fact. So if we have either social media, I'm not sure, or these alternative protests or demonstrations, this is, as a matter of fact, bringing no negative feedback, no de-escalation. The risk is to find, to construct a separate autopoietic system that reproduces itself, cares about reproducing itself, and that very soon will be defeated, physically defeated, hopefully not. But physically defeated by this successful hyper reality. Now, what you brought about, Aviv, the hyper reality is the core of your analysis. Are we in a hyper reality in a way that we should follow Milton's suggestion in order to find a counter hyper reality, or should we get closer to the real reality that actually doesn't exist anymore? Going back to Baudrillard.
Right. Well, I think that we might be forced to create a new hyper reality, like at least create a narrative within the hyper reality. My hope and why I cling on so hard to reality is because I want to still have faith in the tangible, like material realm outside of the hyper real, outside of the digital, because I think that we will never, I fear that we will never resolve anything within the hyper real that we are in now. And of course, you would have to create another narrative and another system within the hyper real that can fight against the narratives that are in place now. But I just really fear that with the combination of political power, like in the real, because this is my problem, is that political power in the real is happening in the real. This war is happening in the real. There are real people dying. There are real people being attacked because of the war in other parts of the world. There are real people being deported and separated from their families in the real. And that's what I want to focus on, because that's what I think is the most, not that it's the most important, but it is the reality of the world. And then we have the hyper real, which diminishes this completely.
Yes, it seems that the real is the dying. What dies is real. The living is already caught up in the digital and
and that's why I feel like there is no resolution, but also I don't want to put all the blame on the hyperreal, because we also have to take into account
you must not, because
that the political structures of the world, and why also the UN doesn't work, why the UN doesn't work, or why the UN fails to meet certain agendas is not because of the hyperreal, but it's because there are decisions being made by real political systems.
The political systems are real, but they work according to another reality.
Right.
So
I think
maybe Matteo, I don't, because Matteo has something to say about that.
No, honestly not. It's everything is extremely interesting, and I'm quite reluctant to put questions because I'm not confident enough in my English. So,
Don't
so
worry,
the point is
English
that
is international English. Don't worry.
yeah, no, I have a lot of interesting concepts I found a lot of interesting concepts in the intervention of Aviv. And I was also reflecting on the effect of Donald Trump on my personal, private, and very, very small social system. I know that is an extremely situated point of view, but for instance, what I have noticed is that Trump tends not only to polarize the debate, but to flatten the debate. So we are having to do with a medal with just one face, one side. If I'm discussing the politics of Trump with my friend that is a trader, he says, okay, but the figures are good. So the debate is flattened on the figures on the market. So there are no alternatives because the market says that Trump is good. Or negotiation. The term negotiation is flattened again to a predatory negotiation. That is not the only form of negotiation. But according to Trump, to negotiate is to put in place a rigid negotiation. What I win is something that I'm grabbing out from you. This is a flattening of the debate.
Winning.
I'm looking for the way to raise my finger and say, okay, but we are prisoner, not even in a false dilemma. There is not anymore the dilemma. There is the one-way thinking. There is a one-way word. What we need to do, and it's extremely difficult and painful, is to enlarge again a little bit our view on the world, saying that negotiation is not only predatory negotiation, there is also altruistic negotiation. The market is not the only the only mechanism allowed to say if the politics are good or not. There are also ethics. There are also the future. We will talk about the future during my next seminar. But the future is not at the center of the discussion now. There is a very short future. The future is tomorrow. So this is my impression regarding the effect of Trump today.
Extreme shortening.
There is also a linguistic flattening. The vocabulary is extremely simple. 2, 3 words, 5 words in the vocabulary of Donald Trump. I don't know. We will see. It's good. It's not good.
Right. There was a historian who, I have the quote that I was thinking of. Let me see. Yes. So Anne Applebaum, which is a journalist and a historian. So on the London Economic, she basically says that he doesn't really have a strategy. Like, he doesn't think strategically or geopolitically. He just thinks in the present. And so every conversation he has to win. It's not that he talks about anything concrete.
Good
he just
point.
has to be the one
Great
who wins.
system.
This is a good
Great
point.
system.
He's
And he
going to
doesn't
negotiate.
Good
He
job.
doesn't think
Pardon me,
about what
Miltos.
that means. He doesn't think about further implications. So all
Yeah.
his like mechanism is winning in the moment and then creating that chaos that he can then use to manipulate people for his political and financial benefit.
And another simple negotiation
Perfect.
technique
Why
is to
don't we
say,
do
I
the
don't have
same?
time. I don't have time for you means that I have something better to do. So I leave you.
Yes, of course he does.
Shortening of time is a very, very basic
and when,
negotiation
in
technique.
the G7, he said, I have to go back because I have to
go
talk
back. I have
about
to play
the
golf.
Middle East when you know that nothing is going to come of it. And the fact that he's saying, oh, we didn't tell Israel that, he first says we didn't tell them to do anything. And then he comes out with a statement a day later, or maybe even a couple hours later, and he's like, I told them they had 60 days. It's day 61. It's like he says one statement before, and then he says another statement that completely erases what he said, like what he thinks. That completely contradicts what he says, and he also lies on national news all the time.
Truth is not anymore an issue, huh?
And they let him, like, the thing is that they let him speak, which is, what do you do? How do you tell him not to speak? I mean.
But there is this kind of shrinking of everything. Shrinking of possibilities, shrinking of time, shrinking of language.
So what?
So
what? It's funny. If you don't see it as a funny game, then you're lost, right? Because it's funny and it rules, right? Okay, like with Trump, there's only one attitude: to admire him because he wins, right? He wins, right? Even if he loses, if now he loses, if today, like the people do the revolution and they throw him out, he won already. So he's a person to admire. They can make a mountain with his face because in a place of mountains, America, he deserves it. He's a mountain. Okay, how can you be something that erodes the mountain, right? Instead of having conversation of how politically correct or wrong or stupid or whatever or out of the system is your enemy, you find new ways to fight your enemy. Because this is a war, and consider the possibility that it will stay forever, right? So this is it. You like it, you don't like it, that's the way. It also makes sense in some way, right? They can take your own.
No, it's clear. It's a clear provocation. It's a clear provocation. It's also a good suggestion, because actually intellectuals themselves have some responsibility. We and our language, maybe. Adam, I see Adam, maybe. No.
Yes, I'm sorry that I'm driving, so I've been listening to this fascinating presentation. Thank you so much. I had a few thoughts, but I can summarize them quickly. One is one of the kind of questions that came out of your presentation was the notion of like supervenience in science, or in thinking about scientific theories and how you theorize different types of cybernetic systems, and the question of foundational kind of thinking as opposed to kind of totalized thinking is really interesting and something that you can develop. One that try to develop it in terms of that supervenience is Bruno Latour, that I'm sure that you're familiar with his work. But I don't think that Latour really gives an answer in the network conception. I don't think he gives an answer to the question of systematicity of systems that you bring up, which I think is really interesting. The other thing is the question regarding presentification or presentism, what you were talking about, this sort of kind of cannibalization of space and time now. in a post-Baudrillardian kind of universe that everything that exists in the present. So one of the questions that comes to my mind is what disappears first, the politics, the political, or the ecological? Because they're not the same. So this is a question that makes me think even more about this sort of notion of disappearance, what Baudrillard marked as disappearance, but now we are in the post-disappearance of the agency. But we are relying on the agency nonetheless, so it's a kind of a paradoxical dilemma. But thank you again. I mean, these are just some thoughts that I had. But
yes, I agree that I think the question of where is agency now in the real, and as Mito said, that now we should focus, at least my generation should focus on having those conversations in the hyper real with the enemy, let's say, as a solution, as a possible solution of new agency within the hyper real. I just think that when you are in a conflict personally, I think that also changes a lot of things. I think that it's impossible for both the let's say if we talk about the war in Gaza right now, I think it's impossible for Israelis at least that are not on the right, okay, that are not Bibists, okay, and also hostage families, and also I think it's difficult for, let's say, Palestinians that are in Gaza and have lost family members and also are under occupation in the West Bank. I think it's hard for them to imagine the hyper real, because they are in the real and it's very much real. And that's where that's where I'm interested in looking. I still am interested in salvaging that real that still is experienced by those people. And I know that it might seem naive to have those people talk about or have a narrative in the sense that it will never be able to win the hyper real that Bibi or Trump have created. But I still really hope and cling that is what's important. I do think that those grassroots and individual stories and perceptions of what's happening on the ground are what will bring us back to the real. That's what I think. And it might be impossible now, but I do think that
How do you communicate them? How do you communicate the
but there
stories
are
once you collect
people.
them?
Okay, so there is this guy who you should follow, but I know you're in the
No, I will, of course. I'm following everybody.
So he's the best. So he is part of the Atlantic Council, and he's created this page called Realign for Palestine. Okay, he's lost over 30 family members in Gaza. He lives in the United States now, but he is just he speaks against Hamas and obviously also against the occupation, but he goes for pragmatic approach. His name is Ahmed Fawd Al-Khatib, okay, and he does wonderful work, and he met with hostage families. He on Realign for Palestine, he does interviews. He meets with Israelis, and they have a conversation. And this is the type of content that I think is essential for their.
How many Bibis and how many MAGAs are they following him?
But exactly, that's what I think is that they don't. Well, the thing is that then he goes into conversation with people, because then there's the pro-Palestinian side who call him a traitor, who called him, he's on an insider job, like Israel paid him to speak bad about Hamas. I don't know, all these things.
So he does a wonderful job for them.
Thank you.
But you understand this, right? If you do this and you are not in dialogue with your enemies or the robots, that your enemies are influencing.
Oh, the robots. But he talks to real people who are who are
No, the robots, I mean the people that are following this without being that, but they vote that.
Right.
Okay, so.
But he speaks to those who, people criticize him, and he will post like something criticizing their criticism. I don't know. I just think that, I don't know if he interacts with the other side, because I only follow him, but I know that he does respond to people. I also think this other guy who is incredible is the Ask Project. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's Gil Schuster, who goes in Israel and interviews just people straight up on the street, both Arabs, Palestinians, also goes to
all
Israel.
this is great, but it's academic, is the work that universities are doing, right? But when it comes to medicine, you need it because you need like some vaccine or something. But when it comes to reality, the university work, it comes to nothing when it's days like this, right? When it's days of the 70s, you can analyze it. But when it comes actually to prepare a big devastation, right? Like, what did you ever thought? What if this is just the beginning? Now is Gaza, tomorrow is Israel, like Gaza is burning, tomorrow Israel is burning, the day after Gaza is burning again, the new Gaza, the day after Israel is burning again, then the next day Athens is burning, constantly for the next 60 years.
This will happen.
Right.
This will happen.
So if
why. Yes.
Right. So if this will happen, why aren't you preparing for some kind of alternative something?
But he says the alternative is that we must we need pragmatism, in the sense that, yes, this is academic, but this is where I say that we need to, this is where the foundation comes in the real education, because people do go to school in the real. And
the first thing they should be doing is to step out of the school, right? So, listen, if there was one thing the Israelis should do, is not to go to their job, right? Not to do demonstrations, do nothing.
I think in general, my generation, of course, the Israeli school system, I'm saying that is separate, because you need to also reevaluate that and the history that they talk about and everything. Even in the United States, the education system is terrible. The way they depict America and, what happened, etc. But I think that the big issue is that in the Middle East specifically, there's countries who are authoritarian, and Israel is now, I would say, one of those. And I think that they are going to be most affected by the environment, because that region is 50% increase in temperature than the rest of the world as we're speaking. So all of those people will be burning, and they won't have water, and there will be no food. And this is going to happen in 20, maybe even 20 years. And so that's what I think that people need to focus on, instead of these conflicts. But these conflicts are here now, and so I guess I don't know how will we get a resolution if those people are in power, and also if we as people do not know how to organize ourselves against the regimes. And so I guess you're saying, yes, we should be engaging in the hyper real. But
no. Sorry. I did not say that. Okay, I say that you cannot drop the hyper-real. You cannot drop the hyper-real, right? So that's what I said. Then the next, definitely you should be involved in the real, but not should, because you cannot go to a young person and say, 20 years old person, go do that. The king of the real, who is the Pope. Right, the Pope is the most involved guy with the real by definition. So the king of the real was the Pope Francis. He did not even made it to Gaza. So forget the real when it comes to emergency. When it comes to emergency, people move according to the miseries or to the little problems of their lives. There are few people, historically we even remember them, like people like St. Francis, who were doing this. They were always there on the real. So you cannot really trust the real. What you can do on the real is actually build new communication. But to build new communication, a new modus operandi, you have to step out completely from the old.
Yes.
what I suggest. So I don't suggest this engagement with a real to be to some hyper-real. I'm like one of the masters of hyper-real, which the last 20 years of my life, I am deeply involved with the real, more with the real than with the hyper-real, because the hyper-real is like a nightmare and it's not pretty after all, right? But you cannot give it, you cannot give it, you cannot give it to your enemy, and it's not even fun. And if you are young, I mean, it's a lot fun, the hyper real. So find new funny ways to do it, right? Then come back to the real, organize with these new ways, new groups, new attitudes, right? If you could convince, like the Israeli population, you say 70 against, okay, then they could stop this war tomorrow. Like all kids, they can refuse to go out to school. All people who are workers, they should stop working. Bye-bye war. It's over, right? 70%. How you stop such a thing in democracy? They stop working. They don't go to work. Finish, right? So if you come out from old ways of thinking, so you don't talk to people about demonstrations. You don't explain them like endlessly why Trump, why this guy, why Bibi is bad. You say, the great Bibi, let's fuck him up, right? Bibi is great. We love him. Look at him, how great he is. We love him. Okay, you also invite him. He comes to your house. Bibi, come here. Bravo, you succeed. And you're like, watch me now. I'm not coming to work. I don't come to work. Why you didn't come? Because one of our friends on your Instagrams are pro. I don't want to go to work. You don't say, I'm not coming to work because the Palestinians are dying, because the poor ladies. Who cares about the poor ladies? They are not for real, right? Unless you are in front of a woman dying, a kid dying, he does not exist. He's not real. You cannot claim him for the real, and that's not a new thing. It was always like that. It was like that from the 40s, from the 30s, from always. Who cares from who is dying like a little further down the road? You never see him. He's not real. So the only way you can actually handle that as a generation is to create new ways, like fantasize, put fantasy into practice.
But it's not that when the new generations have succeeded, it's not because someone said to them what to do. You know, it cannot be an intention, or yours is a very nice vision of the future and a very exact analysis of the failure of the opposition, because this opposition doesn't exist. It is obsolete. It is oldish. The Protestants and the protesters are young people, but they behave in an oldish way. Absolutely true. But you can't tell the young people what to do, because it is never done by intention or by rational analysis. Either it happens or it doesn't. No way that you
Okay. You can't, but we tell them anyway. Who cares? They can like spit on us. Doesn't matter. They're young people, so they shouldn't listen to us. So when we tell them what to do, they should be doing something that we never even imagine, right? Or do the opposite.
You've given.
But I don't know if we have we have it also. We are so privileged, also. I think this is also
right.
Consideration.
So why don't you start from that, from the privilege?
Because they don't care about anything.
Either you are privileged and you can retract, or you are there and you can't.
And I feel that the hyper real is for the privileged and not for the not privileged. And that's where that's why also we have this disconnect, because I can interact in the hyper real, or I can, not me, but like maybe someone who is privileged, can be in the Instagram all day and on TikTok, and then you have the people inside of the conflict, or, in poor like situations that don't have time.
Save their skin.
They don't have time to be in the hyper real. And so that's why I want to talk about them. That's why I care about them.
But in the hyper real, you can create groups, new fashions. Then you go to the clinic ladies, if they exist in Israel. I don't even believe. I believe like everybody. So also you have to start preparing for societies that increasingly they will be very far away from the other people. So most people around you will be like you. So start from that side, right? And then find new ways to talk.
Yes.
like new diagrams that somehow study video games. I don't know what, study passion.
Also, just to say, so sorry, I have to teach a class right
Yes,
now
okay.
in English.
No, it's okay, it's
So
okay.
I have
We don't want to
So
make
I'm
you
so
very tired.
sorry. I really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
these conversations.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Brunella, for bringing.
Thank you so much.
Niklas. Ciao, Aviv. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. We
Bye.
will discuss
Thank you.
more. We'll
Yes.
talk more.
Yes. Bye. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
Thank
much.
you. Bye.
Ciao,
Bye.
ciao.
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 Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.